Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I see there's standing room only. As was just mentioned, Silicon Valley has become a metaphor. So welcome to Silicon Valley, but really you can experience it anywhere in the world. In Silicon Valley, we have a word for failure, which is experience. And I've always considered failure just to be success deferred, but I've very much felt that in Korea. I've been to Seoul many times and enjoyed my trips there. Chairman Chang mentioned the challenges facing Korea, but as I walk through the malls in Seoul, the teenagers there on their mobile devices are among the most advanced in the world. And Korea really has been very entrepreneurial for many decades now. So actually, Chairman Chang mentioned my music company. I sold that to Hyundai Development, the construction company. And they've done a great job with it. It continues to be a major music synthesizer brand. So the essence now of entrepreneurship is really creating more and more intelligent devices. And I've been involved with AI for over 50 years. So I'll tell you a few stories about intelligence. That goes back 200 million years ago with the emergence of the neocortex, which only mammals have, and that's where we do intelligence. And I'll tell you my story in my experience with computers and artificial intelligence. Muriel Rukeyser says the world is not made up of atoms, it's made up of stories. And that was actually our first invention with spoken language. So I could tell you stories, like the story of that lion hiding behind the rock, and you might not want to disturb him. That became good for survival. So my first story is I became an inventor when I was 5. My grandmother, actually her mother had started the first school for girls to get a higher education in Europe. She started a school called the Sternschule, which went from kindergarten to 14th grade. If you were lucky enough to get an education at all as a girl in Europe in the 19th century, you went through 9th grade. It was quite revolutionary. People challenged her, what's the point of educating a girl? She went around Europe making that argument, became very influential on women's education. Her daughter became the first woman in Europe to get a PhD in chemistry, took over the school. They ran it for 70 years and fled Vienna in 1938 when Hitler came in. And she wrote an autobiography called One Life is Not Enough. She wrote it on a mechanical typewriter. And when I was 5, she showed me the typewriter. And I was more interested in the typewriter than the story she wrote on it. Because this, to a 5-year-old, was a magical machine. You could actually take a blank piece of paper and turn it into something that looked like it came from a book. That was quite magical to a 5-year-old. Now, I was actually into parlor magic, and I realized that with parlor magic, if you see how the magic works, the magic goes away. But that was not the case with technology. I could see exactly how the typewriter worked, and it was still magical. So this inspired me to go through the neighborhood and bring back little mechanical devices. I'd bring back broken radios and broken bicycles, take them apart, and I created a big inventory of little electrical and mechanical devices. And I had no idea how to put them together, but I had this idea that if I could just figure out how to assemble them, I could solve any problem in the world. And I decided I would be an inventor when I was 5. When I was 8, I actually had some success. I had a mechanical virtual reality puppet theater, and I had a command station, and I could control the world from this command station with mechanical linkages and bring the sun and the stars onto the stage and people on and off and move their limbs. So that was a big hit in my 4th grade class. When I was 12, I discovered the computer. Hardly remarkable today. You won't find a 5-year-old today who doesn't use a computer, but when I was 12, there were only 12 computers in all of New York City. And I discovered one. I became the programmer for the Head Start program, which was an experiment in early education, and So I helped them program some statistical tests to evaluate how that was working. And I very quickly had the idea that in the computer's brain, you could create virtual realities, and you could also create intelligence. And ultimately, we could simulate all of those things inside a computer. I quickly discovered artificial intelligence, which had only gotten its name a few years earlier, in 1956, at a Dartmouth conference. So very quickly, the artificial intelligence field separated into two warring camps. There was the symbolic school, defining intelligence based on all the logical rules that would govern a situation. And certain situations worked well for that. The biggest triumph was chess, which happened in 1997. This was based on logical rules, defining all the different moves logically, then logically figuring out all the move, counter-move sequences and evaluating them. And the symbolic school was in ascendancy for the first few decades. The connectionist school, where you try to emulate intelligence by building rough simulations of how the human brain works, neural nets, also actually started in the 1950s. So in 1962, I was 14. I wrote a letter to the leaders of these two schools of thought. There was no email back then, and they invited me to visit them. I was 14. So I went up, I lived in New York, I went up to MIT, met Marvin Minsky. He was the head of the symbolic school. Not widely known, he actually also invented neural nets in the 1950s, but he became disillusioned with them. And Frank Rosenblatt, who created the first successful neural net called the perceptron. So I went up to see Minsky. He spent all day with me as if he had nothing else to do. He was a consummate educator. I then went to MIT to study with him. He became my mentor for over 50 years until his passing about a year ago. And he said, well, where are you going now? I said, well, to see Dr. Rosenblatt at Cornell. And he said, don't waste your time with that. Rosenblatt had this machine called the perceptron, and he said, ultimately, this will be able to translate languages and read books and understand them and basically emulate human intelligence. But it really couldn't do any of those things. And there was a backlash against this sort of hype about the perceptron. So I went up there, I brought some printed letters that had a camera, and it could recognize the print on the page so long as it was in the Courier 10 type style. I showed it a different type style, and it didn't work. And it didn't do any of the things that he claimed that it could do. And he said, but don't worry. We'll be able to solve these problems. We'll take the output of the perceptron and feed it as the input to another perceptron, and take the output of that and feed it as the input to another perceptron. And as we add more layers, it'll become smarter, and it'll generalize, and it'll be able to solve these problems. So, oh, that's interesting. Have you tried that? Well, no, but it's high on our research agenda. Things did not move quite as quickly back then as they do now. He died 9 years later, in 1971, never having tried that idea. But this was his intuition. 1969, Minsky published a book with his colleague Seymour Papert called Perceptrons. It proved a theorem that a perceptron could not solve a very simple problem, which is to take a visual image and determine whether all the parts of it are connected or not, something a human can do very easily. And this proved mathematically a perceptron could not do it. And the book was very successful in killing all the funding for neural nets for 25 years. Something that actually in the last couple of years of his life, I talked to Minsky, and he regretted that because he had become, late in his life, a fan of neural nets again. Turns out, I mean, I wrote this in my book in 1999, The Age of Spiritual Machines, that theorem only applies to single-level neural nets. This idea that Rosenblatt had of having multi-layer neural nets, that theorem didn't apply. So there's a big resurgence now in AI. AI has become a big hit. It's doing things that it could never do before, like play Go at master levels. That's actually a victory of the connectionist school, neural nets, not the symbolic school. What accounts for that? Well, what accounts for that was Rosenblatt's two things. Rosenblatt's original intuition that if we add more layers, it would get smarter and smarter. Now, as of maybe 5, 6 years ago, we really couldn't go beyond 3 or 4 levels. You could, of course, create a 10-level neural net, but it didn't work. There was a math problem. This is not widely recognized. As you go to more and more levels, the information would disintegrate. In mathematical terms, it has to do with falling into a local minima and not finding the optimal solution for the whole problem. So mathematicians solved that problem, including Jeff Hinton, one of my colleagues at Google, and now they could go to 100 levels or more. In fact, it was a 100-level neural net that won the Go championship. And the other key development is what I call the law of accelerating returns, which I'll talk about, which is the exponential growth of the power of information technology. It takes a lot of computing and a lot of memory to have a 100-layer neural net. So 5 or 6 years ago, the big accusation against the AI field was, you guys can't even tell the difference between a dog and a cat, something that a 5-year-old can do. Well, it turns out the essence of a dog and a cat is actually pretty complicated, it's pretty subtle, and it's at level 15. So when we could only go to 3 or 4 levels because of this math problem, we couldn't tell the difference between a dog and a cat. When that problem was solved and we could go to 100 levels, now we could tell the difference between a dog and a cat and 1,000 other categories and do it better than humans on recent tests. And all these other accomplishments of AI have really come from these 100-level or more neural nets. But there's still a problem. There's a motto in the field that life begins at 1 billion examples. So one of the reasons I'm at Google is we have examples of some things, like pictures of dogs and cats. We have billions of language, but it's not annotated with what it means. How would you annotate it anyway? With more language, which computers can't understand in the first place? So the problem, there's still a weakness in these neural nets. Humans can learn from 1 or 2 examples. Your significant other, your boss tells you something once, you might actually learn from that. Some people have been reported to do that. That's the strength of human intelligence. We can learn pretty quickly, and we don't have to experience something 1 billion times to learn from it. So I have a different thesis on how human intelligence works. It's not a big neural net. It's actually a series of modules. Each module can learn a pattern, and these modules are organized in hierarchies, and because the world is naturally hierarchical. And this is actually how the neocortex works. So that gets me to my other story, which goes back 200 million years ago, but I'll try to go through it quickly. Biological evolution noticed that the world is organized in hierarchies. Trees have trunks, which have branches, which have more branches, which lead to leaves. There's a hierarchical structure to the world. So we need a hierarchical brain capability, brain structure that can actually understand hierarchies. And so the neocortex emerged in mammals 200 million years ago. And it was capable of actually understanding the hierarchies of the world. The first mammals were rodents, like mice. And the neocortex means new rind. It basically was a very thin covering around the walnut-sized brains of these early mammals. It was the size of a postage stamp. It was as thin as a postage stamp. But it was capable of a new type of thinking. It was basically capable of what we're celebrating here at this conference, which is creativity, innovation, coming up with new behaviors. Animals without a neocortex had fixed behaviors. They could learn a new behavior, but not in one lifetime. Maybe over 10,000 lifetimes, normal biological evolution would evolve a new fixed behavior, whereas these mammals could actually learn a new behavior very quickly. A mouse is escaping a predator. Its usual escape path is blocked. It will invent a new behavior to cope with that. Probably wouldn't work, but if it did work, it would remember that, and that could actually spread virally through the community. Another mouse watching this might say, well, that was really clever going around that rock. I'm going to remember to do that. And this new behavior, a new insight would spread through the community, and only mammals could do that. Didn't actually help very much. because the environment changed very slowly. These non-mammalian animals were very well evolved for their ecological niches. It might take 50,000 years for there to be an environmental change that would require a new behavior, and over that time, these non-mammalian animals without a neocortex could evolve a new behavior to cope with it. But then something happened. 65 million years ago, there was a sudden cataclysmic change to the environment. If you dig down to an area of rock reflecting 65 million years ago, the geologists will explain it shows a very violent, sudden change to the environment. And we see it all around the globe. And we call it the Cretaceous extinction event, because that is when the dinosaurs went extinct. That's when 75% of all the animal and plant species went extinct, because they couldn't cope with this sudden change. And that's when mammals took over, because they could, at least many of them, could actually invent new behaviors in a matter of days to cope with this very sudden change to the environment. And so mammals, so to anthropomorphize biological evolution, said, this neocortex is pretty good stuff, and it began to grow it. And now mammals got bigger, their brains got bigger at an even faster pace, taking up a larger fraction of their bodies. And the neocortex got bigger even faster than that, developing these curvatures distinctive of a primate brain. And so mammals actually kind of took over, particularly primates. Then something else happened. If you remember, 2 million years ago, we were walking around, we didn't have these big foreheads. So biological evolution created a bigger skull so that we could have more neocortex. Up until recently, it was thought that the frontal cortex, which is where we do things like language and art and conferences, was thought to be qualitatively different. My thesis actually 50 years ago is that it was not different. It was just an additional quantity of neocortex. And recent findings in brain reverse engineering show that that is in fact the case. It's organized the same way as the rest of the neocortex. It was just more of it. Well, so what did we do with it? We were already doing a very good job of being primates. So we put it at the top of the hierarchy. And as you go up the hierarchy, things get more interesting and more intelligent. At the very bottom of the hierarchy, which is where the senses flow into, I can tell that that's a straight line. At the top of the hierarchy, I can tell that was funny, that was ironic, she's pretty. So things get more intelligent as you go up the hierarchy. So we put it at the top of the hierarchy. Our hierarchy now got bigger. That was the enabling factor for us to invent language and art and music. Every human culture we've ever discovered has music. No primate culture has music. Humor is distinctly human. That all takes place at the top of the neocortical hierarchy. So, but that was a one-shot deal, because if our brains continued to get bigger, birth would have become impossible. But that was just enough for us to get over that threshold to invent language and technology, and that has its own now evolutionary process. We're going to do it again. We're going to again extend our neocortex. This time it won't be inside the skull, it'll be in the cloud. The cloud is pure information technology. It's expanding exponentially. As you go out to the 2030s, we'll connect our neocortex to the cloud and become smarter. That won't be a one-shot deal because the cloud keeps getting more powerful. So let me show you a few slides and then come back to the future of intelligence and how we will expand our neocortex again. But to get back to my story, 1981, I realized that the key to being successful as an inventor was timing. The inventors whose names you recognize, like Thomas Edison or Larry Page, my new boss, actually my first boss for a company I didn't start myself, were in the right place with the right idea at the right time. And invariably, you see other people who tried to do the same thing earlier, but it was too early, and if you came later, you missed the boat also. You had to be in the right place at the right time. So I began to study technology trends to try to time my own inventions to be timely. I started with the common wisdom that you cannot predict the future. And there are some things that are unpredictable, but I made a very surprising discovery. There's one thing about the future that's amazingly predictable, and I call it the law of accelerating returns, and it's this. The price, performance, and capacity, not of everything, not of every technology, but of every information technology is very predictable. And what's predictable is that it grows exponentially. In other words, it doubles every period of time, 2, 4, 8, 16, and so on. And that's not our intuition. Our intuition is linear. When I was walking through the fields 10,000 years ago, I'd look up and go, okay, that animal's going that way. I'm coming up the field this way. We're going to meet at that rock. That's not a good idea. I'm going to take a different path. That became good for survival. That became hardwired in our brains. We didn't expect that animal to speed up as it went along. We made a linear prediction as to where that animal would be. And the kind of challenges we had, linear predictions worked very well. That is our intuition about the future. That's not the reality of information technology. It progresses exponentially, not linearly. So what's the difference? A linear prediction, that's our intuition, goes 1, 2, 3. An exponential trajectory, that's the reality of information technology, goes 1, 2, 4. Sounds similar, but by the time you get to step 30, the linear projection, that's our intuition, is at 30. The exponential trajectory is at 1 billion. Step 40, it's at 1 trillion. This is not an idle speculation about the future. I mean, this is several billion times more powerful per dollar than the computer I used when I went to MIT as an undergraduate. And we'll do it in the next 25 years because it's now doubling in power for the same price in less than a year. It's like 11 months. And this is the primary difference between myself and my critics. We're both looking at the same reality today, and then they use a linear intuition, which is not realistic. I'll give you an example. Halfway through the Genome Project, which was a project to sequence the human genome, 7 years into this 15-year project, 1% of the genome had been collected. So mainstream critics, including a Nobel Prize winner, said, I told you this wasn't going to work. Here you are, 1%, 7 years. It's going to take 700 years, just like we said. My reaction at the time was, oh, we finished 1%? We're almost done. Because 1% is only 7 doublings from 100%. And indeed, 7 years later, it was finished. That exponential growth has continued since the end of the Genome Project. That first genome cost $1 billion. We're now down to $1,000 per genome. And it's not just collecting this raw object code of life that's progressing exponentially. Our ability to understand it, to model it, to simulate it, and most importantly, to reprogram it is also expanding exponentially. That's now called biotechnology, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So exponential growth is quite revolutionary, and it's also amazingly predictable. So let me show you the first graph I had in 1981, which is the price performance of computers going back to the 1890 American census, the first to be automated. This is a logarithmic scale. And so you probably can't see the details, but you can see that curve. That's a logarithmic scale. As you go up the y-axis, we're not adding to what we're measuring, we're adding zeros, orders of magnitude. Every label level there is 100,000 times greater than the level below. The curve, which goes back to the 1890 census, represents trillions-fold increase in the amount of computation you can get for the same cost. So this goes through 2010. In 1981, I had it through 1980. We just recently updated it to 2015. It's right on the curve. People look at this and they go, oh, Moore's Law. But Moore's Law is just the part on the right having to do with chips. This exponential growth started decades before Gordon Moore was born. It's gone through 5 different paradigms. We're now entering the 6th paradigm, which is 3-dimensional molecular computing. But the most interesting thing about this graph is, where is World War I or World War II or the Cold War or the worldwide Great Depression of the 1930s? None of that has any impact on this. It goes through thick and thin, through war and peace, through boom times and recessions. People say, well, it must have slowed down during the recent recession in 2008, 2009, but that's not the case. I had this through 1980 and 81. I projected out to 2050. We're now 36 years later. The curve is exactly where I had predicted it would be in 1981. So this aspect of the future is amazingly predictable. Now, what impact that will have on the world isn't always predictable. There's an analysis of 147 predictions I made in my 1999 book, The Age of Spiritual Machines, about the year 2009. 86% were correct. The ones that were incorrect were directionally correct, like we would have self-driving cars, which weren't quite the case in 2009. So that was one of the 14% that were wrong, but it's still only off by a few years. The predictions that had to do specifically with predicting capacity and price performance of different technologies were really right on cue. Time magazine had a cover story on this law of accelerating returns. They wanted to put a particular computer they had covered in the magazine as the last point. It's right on the curve, and this is a curve I had laid out more than 30 years earlier. So this aspect of the future is amazingly predictable. And there's many manifestations of this. You could buy one transistor for $1 in 1968. You can buy 10 billion for $1 today. And they're better because they're smaller, so the electrons have less distance to travel, so they're faster. The cost of a transistor cycle, that's a measure of price performance of electronics, comes down by half every year. That's why you can buy an iPhone or an Android phone that's twice as good as the one 2 years ago for half the price. We put some of that improved price performance into price, put some of it into performance. That's a fourfold increase in price performance in 2 years. That's a 50% deflation rate. Economists actually worry about deflation. We had massive deflation during the worldwide depression of the 1930s. Different reason, that was a collapse of consumer confidence. But the concern is if I can buy twice as much stuff as I could buy a year ago for the same price, I'll buy more, but am I going to actually double my consumption and do that year after year to keep up with this 50% deflation rate? And if I don't, let's say I increase my consumption 50%, which is every year, which is a lot, then the size of the economy, not as measured in bits, bytes, and base pairs, but as measured in constant currency, will come down. And for a variety of good reasons, that would be a bad thing. That's actually not what happens. We actually more than double our consumption. Here's bits of memory. Shipped. I have dozens of different consumption charts like this. We more than double our consumption. There's actually been 18% growth in constant currency of every form of information technology for the last 50 years, 18% per year, despite the fact that you can get twice as much of it each year for the same price. And the reason for that is what you're celebrating here at this conference is innovation and creativity. We invent new capabilities that didn't exist before. And they take off when the price performance is there. There were attempts to create search engines before 1998, but really the computers were not powerful enough. I made a prediction in the early 80s that search engines would be needed by 98. I looked at the ARPANET, which was the predecessor to the internet. It connected 1,000 scientists in the United States, but it was doubling every year, so I did the math and said, whoa, this is going to be a World Wide Web, connecting hundreds of millions of people around the world by the late 1990s. People thought that was crazy when the entire American defense budget could only tie together 1,000 scientists. But that's the power of exponential growth. And I said, we'll need search engines because there'll be so much information we won't be able to find anything. And the computation and communication resources to create an effective search engine would be in place. What I could not predict is that of the 50 different projects to create an effective search engine, it'd be these couple of kids in a Stanford dorm a few miles from here who would take over the world of search. Not everything is predictable. Had I made that prediction, I wouldn't have to work very hard today. But the existence and the need for search engines was predictable. And that on the right is the number, it's also a logarithmic scale. That's the number of bits we move around wirelessly in the world. It's going back 100 years. Korea is actually a leader in this. That's a logarithmic scale. Again, so that represents trillions-fold increase. But look at how predictable a phenomenon that is. And I mentioned biotechnology. So this is the cost of DNA sequencing, which has come down by half every year. The amount of genetic data we have sequenced worldwide is doubling every year. Again, exponential growth. What this means is that biology and health and medicine, which is based on it, is now an information technology. It didn't used to be. It was hit or miss. We just kind of find things accidentally. We'd use computers to organize the information, but fundamentally it was a linear process because we'd find things accidentally. Now we're actually understanding the software of life and are able to reprogram it. And this is now impacting clinical practice. Now, the linear process has been helpful. Life expectancy was 19 1,000 years ago. I gave a speech to junior high school kids, science winners from around the United States, and I said, if it hadn't been for this progress, you all would be senior citizens, because life expectancy was 19. So it's definitely been useful. It was 37 only 200 years ago. But this is going to go into high gear as we've now transitioning health and medicine from having been a linear process to being an exponential one. And all the projections done by life insurance companies or about the solvency of Social Security in the United States are based on linear models. I've talked to people who create these projections and say, oh, will we take scientific progress into account? Yes, but based on the old model of linear progress, ignoring this grand transition of health and medicine from having been a linear process to being an exponential one. Now, we're just getting the first actual clinical benefit. We can now fix a broken heart, not yet from romance. That'll take some more advances in virtual reality, but from a heart attack. My father had a heart attack in the 60s. He could hardly walk. Half of all heart attack survivors have a damaged heart. We could never fix that before. Now we can reprogram adult stem cells, inject them into the heart, and rejuvenate the heart. And I've talked to people who could hardly walk and are now rejuvenated. We can reprogram adult stem cells to grow human organs. I'm involved with a company where we're doing that. We're growing kidneys, hearts, and lungs with modified stem cells. This has been done successfully in animals, including pigs, which are pretty close to humans. It's coming to a human near you soon. There's many examples of how we're going to revolutionize medicine and ultimately, I think, cure virtually all diseases through this exponential growth of health and medicine. It's now a trickle of applications. It'll be a flood over the next 10 years. 10 years from now, health and medicine will be very different, revolutionized by this conversion of health and medicine into an information technology. 3D printing, which is actually pretty popular in Korea, will bring this information technology advances to physical things. So I had an onstage dialogue with Christine Lagarde a few weeks ago at the annual meeting of the International Monetary Fund, and her first challenge was, well, where are all the productivity gains from these fantastic advances in information technology? And I said, well, we factor them out. We put them in the numerator and the denominator. So when a kid in Africa spends $75 on a smartphone, that counts as $75 of economic activity, despite the fact that it's $1 trillion of computation circa 1965, $1 billion circa 1980. It has millions of dollars of free information services like an encyclopedia that's far better than the one I saved up as a teenager and spent thousands of dollars on at that time. It counts for no economic activity because it's free. And it says, okay, well, there's these fantastic gains in the digital world, but you can't wear information technology, you can't eat it, you can't live in it. So my next point was all of that's going to change as well. These fantastic gains are going to affect the material world. I just skipped over a slide on energy. We're making exponential gains. This is a logarithmic scale on solar energy. It's doubling every 2 years. Larry Page and I did a study for the National Academy of Engineering on this. And people dismissed it. It's only a fraction of a percent of the world's energy. It's a fringe player. It's a nice thing to do, but that's not the solution. Ignoring the exponential growth, just as it was ignored with the internet and with the Genome Project. At the time, it was 0.5%. That's only 8 doublings from 100% in 2 years each. Now it's 2%. People still dismiss it. That's only 6 doublings from 100%. And when we double 6 more times and are meeting all the world's energy needs through solar, and the same thing is true of other renewables like wind and geothermal, we'll be using 1 part in 10,000 of the sunlight, 1% of 1%. So there's plenty of headroom. So that's energy. 3D printing is going to meet many of our material needs. Now, we're kind of in the hype phase now. The parameters are not quite there yet. We need submicron resolutions. The resolution of 3D printing now is about 4 or 5 microns. It's not good enough. When we get to submicron resolutions around 2020, we'll be able to print out clothing, for example. And people go, great, there goes the fashion industry. But look at other industries that have already transformed from physical products to digital products. If I wanted to send you a movie or a book or a music album, just a few years ago, I'd send you some kind of box, some kind of postal package in the mail. Now I can send you an email attachment. And indeed, there's an open source market with millions of free books and documents and videos and movies and music, and you can have a very good time legally with these free media products. People still spend money to read Harry Potter, see the latest blockbuster movie, and so on. So what happened to the revenues of those industries? They actually went up, not down, despite the fact that you can get millions of free, high-quality products. So same thing will happen with fashion. People will download free designs, print them out at pennies per pound. You'll be able to dress very well. It's a great equalizer, but people will still spend money for the latest designs from hot designers. That'll be the nature of the economy going forward. It'll be a coexistence of free open source products and proprietary products. So you can do some cool things now. Larry Page, Peter Diamandis, and I co-founded Singularity University. We had an opening for a recent program. Every instrument in the band was printed out on a 3D printer. These are some other products you can print out today. But this is going to revolutionize manufacturing in the 2020s. As for living in information technology, actually, it's a demonstration of creating a 3-story office building in a matter of days by assembling little modules that are printed out on a 3D printer that could be snapped together like Lego bricks. This is going to revolutionize manufacturing as we get to the 2020s. So we're not there yet, but information technology will affect all of these physical things. Food, there's going to be a vertical agriculture revolution where we grow food in vertical buildings. Right now we take up 40% of the usable land with horizontal agriculture. So these will be AI-controlled manufacturing facilities where you can grow very high-quality food without chemicals, hydroponic plants for fruits and vegetables, in vitro cloning of muscle tissue for meat, and create very high-quality food, ultimately very inexpensively because it'll be subject to this deflation rate that's inherent in information technology. Another exponential trend is miniaturization. Korea has also been a leader in this area. We're shrinking technology, both electronic and mechanical, at a rate of 100 in 3D volume per decade. By the 2030s, we'll be able to have robotic devices the size of blood cells that will be able to go inside the body and keep you healthy from inside. That's the second major revolution in health. Whatever we don't finish with biotechnology, we'll be able to address with nanotechnology. We'll have medical nanorobots that are the size of blood cells that'll extend the immune system. Now, you have devices right now that are inside your bloodstream, that keep you healthy, that are smart. They are blood cells, they're your T cells. But they evolved thousands of years ago, and it was not in the interest of the human species for us to live very long. Once you were 25, you'd raised your kids, they're ready to start their own family. And from the perspective of evolution,
you're not needed anymore. You're just using up the limited food and resources of the tribe. As I mentioned, life expectancy was 19. But we'll be, so your T cells are smart, but they don't work against things that get you later on in life. It doesn't work against cancer, for example. Revolution in health. So that'll be 2030s. We're only about a dozen years away from a tipping point called longevity escape velocity, where we can add more time than is going by to your remaining life expectancy. So you go forward a year, your life expectancy will move on away from you. So even baby boomers like myself, if you can be in good shape 12 years from now, which is not that long, you'll be able to benefit from this advancing frontier. So I'll just say a few more things about intelligence. I've been creating these simulations of these modules based on this thesis. I had the thesis 50 years ago. That's how I got to meet President Johnson. I won a science contest as a high school student. I have the same thesis in this book that came out in 2012. Larry Page liked it and recruited me to try to implement that at Google. We have one product, Smart Reply, for Gmail. It gives you 3 suggestions to answer your emails. It's based on this technology that we've created. And this is a little bit different than neural nets in that it's a hierarchy of these modules. And that's how the neocortex works. Go out to the 2030s, we'll have perfected this concept. I think we'll have synthetic neocortex in the cloud. So I mentioned that this is billions of times more powerful per dollar per unit currency than the computer I used at MIT. But that's not the most interesting thing about it. This can multiply its capability 1,000,000-fold by connecting wirelessly to the cloud, which it's doing now as I speak. And so this kid in Africa with her smartphone can access all of human knowledge, connecting to millions of computers in the cloud. We can't do that directly from our brains. We do it indirectly through these devices. They're getting closer to us. Ultimately, they'll go inside our bodies and brains, keep us healthy, as I mentioned. But I think the most interesting application will be to connect our neocortex to the cloud, and basically, not just to do things like search and language translation directly from our brains to the cloud, but to actually access more neocortex. So if you remember, 2 million years ago, we added this additional neocortex. That made us a lot smarter. That was the enabling factor for us to invent language and technology and everything that came after that. We're going to do it again by connecting our neocortex to synthetic neocortex in the cloud. That's a 2030 scenario. That's the ultimate implication of artificial intelligence. Only this time, unlike 2 million years ago, it won't be a one-shot deal. The cloud is pure information technology. It's growing exponentially as we speak. So the non-biological portion of our intelligence will get greater and greater. So what are we going to do with it? Well, we'll do the same thing we did 2 million years ago. We'll put it at the top of the hierarchy. And that will make us basically smarter. We'll be better at music. We'll be funnier. We'll be more capable of expressing loving sentiments, writing online newspaper stories, having more interesting conferences. That's the future of intelligence. And in my view, I mean, a lot of the discussions about AI is as if AI is not human. It's as if it's an alien invasion of intelligent machines from Mars. It's not. We create tools to extend our own reach. 1,000 years ago, I couldn't reach fruit at that higher branch, so we created a tool that extended our reach. Who here in this room could build this building or skyscraper? Well, we invented tools that extended the leverage of our muscles. We can now access all of human knowledge with a few keystrokes. We create tools to extend our reach. And AI is a tool like that, and we're going to make ourselves smarter. That's why we created it. It's not an alien invasion to come and compete with us and displace us. We're going to merge with it to make ourselves more capable. That's the future of AI. We'll probably get into some downsides in the discussion, but fundamentally I'm optimistic that this will overcome
pressing human problems. Thank you very much.
So if you look around the room, Ray, we have many age groups. So let's talk about the tipping point of the millennials. So how old are they going to be 100 years from now? Are they going to be 150 years old? I mean, obviously some of us game over, but what is the tipping point and when that's going to happen in the next 12 years? You mentioned that. So we can talk about life expectancy right now for the audience.
Well, I started to talk about that. Most of the expectations on that assume the continued linear progress of health and medicine. In fact, as I've talked to people who create these predictions for life insurance companies, health insurance companies, it's based on this linear model. And it completely ignores the fact that health and medicine is now an information technology. It's progressing exponentially. Exponentials start out very slowly, like nothing is happening, you're doubling tiny numbers, and suddenly it takes off. We're now in that kind of knee of the curve for biotechnology. The next decade is going to be dazzling in the impact it has. So 10, 12 years from now, I believe we'll get to this tipping point where we're adding more time that's going by, not just to the infant life expectancy, but to your remaining life expectancy. So I've written 3 health books. They're really a wake-up call from my baby boomer peers because they're right on the edge. I'm 69 and I can be and hope to be in good shape in 12 years and take advantage of this. Children don't have to do very much. They should wear their seatbelts so we get the self-driving cars going. But we're not far away from this tipping point. And then we're going to get to the mature phase of the nanotechnology revolution, the medical nanorobots, which will finish the job.
And quality of life. Obviously, we're going to be living longer, hopefully, God willing. But quality of life. Are you any predictions on that? Are we?
Yeah. Well, it's a good point because when I mention radical life extension, the first objection is, oh, I don't want to live 500 years like a quintessential 95-year-old. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about really arresting aging and disease and being very healthy. In fact, ultimately expanding our physical and mental capabilities. So I think we'll be in very good shape. People say, oh, but it's going to really get boring doing the same things over and over again. I agree. If we had radical life extension without radical life expansion, life would get actually very tedious and depressing. But we are going to have radical life expansion. We're going to get smarter, as I mentioned. We're going to also have fantastic virtual reality experiences, ultimately also from within the nervous system, using these same medical nanorobots to connect our brain to the cloud and be able to experience virtual reality environments and augmented reality from within the nervous system. So that our experiences will be limited only by our imagination, so life will not become boring. So I think there's plenty of reason to want to stick around and experience this.
Shifting gears to AI, we here in the Valley care deeply about disruption. We know the merits and conversely some of the critiques of disruption. So let's talk about robotic and let's talk about loss of jobs, or possibly we should look at your predictions. Are we going to be adding jobs?
So this is not a new issue. It goes back to the textile industry in London in 1800 when some of these new machines were created that could spin thread and weave cloth. And the Weavers Guild, which had a business model that was passed down from generation to generation, stayed within families, and it hadn't changed for centuries, suddenly was turned on its head and disrupted. And these people lost their livelihood. And the Luddite movement started. It was an actual movement. Now it's become a symbol of opposition to automation. And they said, well, look around, you know, the people that still have jobs, they're going to be out of jobs soon. I heard of a new machine that does this and does that. And indeed, those jobs went away. Nonetheless, employment went up, and there was prosperity as a result of all this automation. And
the common man and woman could now have a whole wardrobe and not just one shirt. And it led to prosperity. Now, if I were a prescient futurist in 1900, talking to an American or European or Asian audience, I'd say, well, 38% of you work on farms, 25% of you work in factories. That's 2/3 of the population. But I predict that by 2015, 115 years, it's going to be 2% on farms and 9% in factories. And everybody would go, oh my God, we're going to be out of work. And I said, well, don't worry. For all the jobs we eliminated at the bottom of the skill ladder, we're going to create new jobs at the top of the skill ladder. And people go, oh, really? What new jobs? And I said, well, I don't know. We haven't invented them yet. That's not a good answer. It happens to be true. It's really because of the political problem. We do that today. We look at jobs, someone driving a car or a truck, we see that that is going to go away. And it's hard to describe the new jobs because they haven't been invented yet. For a really prescient in 1900, I said, well, don't worry, you're going to get jobs creating
websites and apps for mobile devices and online newspapers, and nobody would have any idea what I'm talking about. So that's another part of the problem. It's whole concepts that we haven't invented. Well, let's look at the people say, okay, that's interesting, but we're not creating as many new jobs as we eliminate, and that's not true. I have the statistics for the United States. It's similar in Asia and in Europe. In the United States, we had 24 million jobs in 1900. We have 142 million today. We went from 30% of the population to 45% of the population. Well, are the jobs as good? Well, they pay 11 times as much in constant dollars per hour. We've reduced the work year from 3,000 hours to 1,800 hours. And the jobs are a lot more interesting. They're moving up the skill ladder. They're moving up Maslow's hierarchy. Not everybody loves their job, but increasingly people actually get satisfaction and some of their identity from their employment. In 1900, you were happy if you had a backbreaking job that put food on your family's table. So we're moving in the right direction. Now, can that continue? Well, it's not the first time in human history we've eliminated all jobs. How many jobs circa 1900 exist today? Do we want to bring back jobs of people connecting phone calls with cables? And so we keep inventing new types of employment. I'll give you one example. In the end of the 19th century, we had 58,000 college students in the United States. We have 20 million today, 10 million who service them as faculty and staff. That's 30 million people. That's 10% of the population. It's 20% of the workforce. And what are they doing? They're studying poetry and astronomy and computer science, and that's considered a useful thing to do. If I describe that in 1900, well, people will be studying poetry and astronomy and computer science. People wouldn't even understand what computer science is. People would think that's remarkable. We're going to continue to do that. We're going to reinvent the nature of work. I happen to support the concept of UBI, Universal Basic Income, as a kind of a cushion so that people have economic security. I think a lot of the political turmoil we see is anxiety from people in terms of their economic security, because, as I say, they can't see the world ahead. They can see what's going away in the world that we have. I think we're moving in that direction anyway. So that's a complicated subject, and exactly how we implement that is important. I think it's going to happen. If you go out, let's say to the 2030s, we'll be able to provide a very high quality of life in terms of physical things, food, housing, clothing, very inexpensively, for almost nothing, through these technologies of vertical agriculture and 3D printing and so on. So we're headed towards, I think, a very robust ability to take care of people's physical needs. And we're going to continue moving up Maslow's hierarchy, making jobs more and more interesting. 65% of all the jobs in the United States, Korea, and Europe are information jobs that didn't exist at all 25 years ago, let alone 50.
So I'm in the venture and angel space, and let's say you don't need the money, but let's say that I gave you $1 million and you had 30 days to hopefully make an impact. We love social bottom line investing, meaning let's do good with our capital. Where would you allocate the $1 million if you had 30 days to spend it here? or throughout the world, or even Korea?
Well, I think go out 20 years, maybe 30 days will be enough to change the world, but it still takes a little longer, even though things move quite quickly. But I think we have some pending revolutions, and I would invest in those. It includes AI, includes virtual reality, which isn't quite there yet. I think we're also in the hype phase of that. We don't have all the ducks in a row for that to take off, but that's going to take off quickly. Biotechnology, I think it's going to revolutionize human health and agriculture. That's now at the steep part of the curve. So if you said 5, 10 years, I think we can have a revolutionary impact in those areas. So I would invest in those areas. That's where I do invest, because I think human well-being is going to be transformed by those technologies.
Wonderful. Do we have time? Question? One from the audience, because the time's getting short. Do we have a question? Please, Namho from Korea.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is, what one area of technology do you believe Korea can lead the world in driving forward?
Well, Korea is a leader in online communication. I mentioned walking through the malls in Seoul, and the young people are among the most sophisticated in the world in using online media. And this conference represents online media. So Korea is a leader in that. They're going to continue to transform the world. It's already had an impact. Most of it's positive. There's some things we need to address in terms of using online media to spread hatred and fake news and so on. But so I think that's a major area that Korea is leading in and can continue to. And I was impressed actually long before Silicon Valley was a metaphor with the entrepreneurial culture and spirit in Korea. So I would continue to invest in that area of entrepreneurship, which really is going to affect everything. And information technology is now transforming all areas of life. So I would encourage that sort of spirit of Silicon Valley, which as I say, is a worldwide metaphor now in Korea.
And lastly, I get the last question. Your perfect day, business or personal. What's a perfect day? How do you spend your valuable time?
I don't have a typical day because I have two different things I spend my time on. One is I have generally a writing project, and that's kind of orderly, and I can control it, and I make some progress every day. And I just finished a novel, which will be out next year, and I'm also writing The Singularity is Nearer, which will be out in 2019. So that's part of my day. And then when I was a teenager, there was a show in the United States called the Ed Sullivan Show. And it was a variety show, and there was one act where a guy would come on, and he'd spin a plate on a pole, and it would spin. And then he'd put up another one, and then another one, and he'd keep putting them up. And then the first one started to kind of shake, and he'd come back and he'd twirl them. And at the end of the act, which took a few minutes, he'd have like 30 or 40 of these plates spinning, and he's running back and forth to keep them spinning. So that's a metaphor for my life. I have these different plates spinning. Some are relationships, some are projects. So a good day is that all my plates are spinning and none of them are threatening to crash to the ground. And I've made some progress on a creative project. The greatest thrill in life, well, there's two. Sigmund Freud said there's two poles of life. One is work and one is love. So if my relationships are going well, it's thrilling to have an interaction with somebody that really connects, or in my work life to have some creative insight, some new creative algorithm or an ability to articulate something in my writings. So if I've done one of those things and my plates are spinning, that's a good day.
fabulous wisdom and for all of us. And I also have a TV show here in the Valley called Cretaceous Forum Presents. I'd like to have you on, hopefully next couple of months, talking about really the future, really not 10 years out, but 50 years out, because getting back to what my love is family. And so how can we protect next generation, generations beyond, and talking about the future. And thank you for having such a wonderful guest speaker, Ray Kurzweil. Let's put it up for Ray.